Hey, I'm Jamie from Stonemaier Games, and today I'm going to talk about my top 10 favorite game series. And what I mean by this isn't games that have a bunch of expansions. That's a separate topic. Today I'm talking about game series in which multiple games share some core mechanisms while also iterating on those mechanisms, often in the same world or the same theme. And during my top 10, I'll talk about the types of decisions that publishers make when delving into a series of games. Some quick examples from Stonemaier games. We have Between Two Cities and Between Two Castles. They share a mechanism where you are building something with your neighbors. We have Wingspan, Wyrmspan, and Finspan, three games with a bunch of different mechanisms between them, but also a familiar card-driven engine building system between them. We have the Tokaido line of games, which are relatively new as I'm recording this video, new to us at least, Stonemaier Games. It's a brand that we acquired. And that brand, there's Tokaido, Tokaido Duo, and Namiji. And then we have Rolling Realms and Rolling Realms Redux. Rolling Realms Redux, they use the exact same mechanisms, but with completely new realms in Redux. And last, we have Scythe, My Little Scythe, and Expeditions. Two games that share the same world, and then Scythe and My Little Scythe share similar mechanisms, but distilled down in My Little Scythe. Panelists, before I jump into my top 10 and kind of delve deeper into the types of things that a publisher might think about when thinking about a game series, why we might make a game series rather than making completely new games and completely new worlds every time. I have some panelists with their picks. So Aryn, our solo gamer, primarily plays solo games, picked Wingspan and Wyrmspan. Aryn hasn't played Finspan yet as their number 3. Gloomhaven, Jaws of the Lion, Buttons and Bugs, and Frosthaven as their number 2 series of games. And at number 1, they picked, and I do have it up on the other screen here. Here we go. At number 1, Aryn picked Too Many Bones. And Aryn says, a rollicking dice rolling adventure. Each character you can play as provides their own puzzle for you to try and solve over the course of many campaigns of varying lengths. There's more than one solution to each puzzle as well. Add a healthy amount of humor, fun tactical gameplay where death isn't necessarily the end, just a mere potential bump in the road, and you have a game that keeps me coming back. A game as fun as its learning curve is laborious. And this game is incredibly fun. Thanks, Aryn, for sharing that. Our next series of games, or our next panelist, this is Skiler. Skiler picked at number 3, Sleeping Queens and Sleeping Queens 2, which I actually have not heard of. So that Skiler is our family gamer. I should have said that. Skyler is our family gamer. She picked those as her number 3. Azul, Summer Pavilion, and Queen's Garden as their number 2. And Skyler at number 1 picked, here, I'll put it up on the screen over here. Skyler picked Kingdomino and said, and this is Kingdomino, Queendomino, and Dragomino. And actually, for Aryn, I may not have said the series of games was Too Many Bones, Undertow, and Unbreakable, not just Too Many Bones. Skyler says about Kingdomino, Queendomino, and Dragomino. In these games, you are drafting tiles and aligning terrain to maximize points or hatch dragons. It's so much fun. That's Skyler, our family gamer, sharing that list. And then last, we have Kari, our heavy gamer, on the list. And Kari picked the Terra Mystica series of games. She says, my favorite game series is the Terra Mystica universe. Terra Mystica, Age of Innovation, Terra Nova, and Gaia Project. I really enjoy the mechanisms that each one offers is a completely different difficulty level. And that's true. Terra Nova is the lightest, I would say. And then Terra Mystica, which already jumps up to a pretty heavy game. And then they're arguably Age of Innovation and Gaia Project are around the same weight. I probably put Gaia Project a little bit ahead of Age of Innovation in terms of complexity and weight. Okay, so in the title for this video, I mentioned that there are over 40 plus game series to choose from. There are a lot of game series. A lot of publishers find a game that works really well, that their audience really resonates with, and they go deep into that world or that theme or certain mechanism, and they branch off from that mechanism. And really, for me to think about a game series in this context, the games need to share some core mechanism. These aren't just shared world games. These are games that share a core mechanism and oftentimes a similar theme or world as well. I have a list of over 40 plus in the description of this video, 40 plus game series that you can check out. I won't read through that whole list because it's pretty long. Instead, I'm going to jump forward to my top 10 here. So at number 10, we have the Pandemic series of games. This is a massive series of games with a bunch of different versions of Pandemic, ranging from Pandemic. There's a dice-themed version of Pandemic. There are many different themes of Pandemic. One that I'll mention in a second is my favorite. And then there's Pandemic Legacy, which also has its own series, 3 different Pandemic Legacy games. I think my favorite in the series, if I was going to choose one version of Pandemic to play, it would probably be Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu. This, like all the games on this list, shares a similar DNA to Pandemic in that you are moving some characters around with slightly unique abilities, trying to prevent cultists, in this case, from spreading, from grouping up too much in one place and spreading. The unique thing about Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu, one, it's a pretty tight map. I like how tight the map is here. And 2, I like that these cards at the top of the map, these are variable cards that come out at different times in the game to reveal different problems, different rule changes. I think most of them are like when played, but some of them might have ongoing things that you have to deal with while that card is active. And they culminate in a completely different, if things go really wrongly, then a specific monster, a different monster can come out in the game at the end of the game. So I think the replayability, and it actually, for me, it distills the core game of Pandemic down to some streamlined elements, while then adding these variable elements of play that keeps the game fresh as I'm playing Pandemic Reign of Cthulhu. So at number 10, I have the Pandemic series of games with Reign of Cthulhu as my top pick for this series. And I'll be doing this for all the games on this list, where I'll share the game that that resonates most for me within that series and why that is the case. So that is the Pandemic series at number 10. At number 9, I have the Sleeping Gods series of games. Now, currently, this series is only at 2 games. And for most of the series of games that I considered, I tried to pick those that had at least 3 in the series. But currently, there's only 2 in this series. But I wanted to mention it because it is a really special series of games. There's Sleeping Gods and there's Sleeping Gods Distant Skies, which uses many similar mechanisms to Sleeping Gods, but it also iterates and refines some of them and adds some new mechanisms. But I found that I was, for entirely subjective reasons, I was more compelled to follow through with the entire campaign of Sleeping Gods, and that didn't end up happening for me with Distant Skies, even though I did have a lot of fun playing it. But with Sleeping Gods, the idea is that you are moving a shared ship. It's a cooperative campaign game. You're moving a shared ship around a map, and you have a lot of freedom as to where you can go. And you use this storybook map. Whenever you go off the page of the book, you just move on to the next page. You flip the map over and you go to a completely new page on the map. This freedom, combined with Ryan's art and the storytelling of Ryan, and I think Marjorie, his wife, does a lot of the writing in the game, created a really, really wonderful adventure. It's largely quest driven, where you find a quest and the quest says, it doesn't tell you exactly where to go. It says we're in the volcano mountain. And they might name the mountain. In the volcano mountain, there's a crystal that you can find there. So it doesn't tell you where to find the volcano mountain. It might say to the north, and then you just have to head north and try to find it by looking at the map. I think this series of games is a really, really delightful special series of games, and that's why it's my pick on this list, the Sleeping Gods series of games at number 9. I put it a little bit lower, I think, just because there's only 2 on the list so far. At number 8, I have the Agricola 1 and 2. There's 2 different versions of Agricola, All Creatures Great and Small, and Caverna on my list. Agricola in particular was one of the games that really got me into the modern gaming hobby feels like around 15 years ago. I don't know if that's entirely the right timeline. I'm filming this in 2025. But I think if I were to play one of them, while I'm the most familiar with Agricola, I think I'd go and play Caverna, because I really love the dichotomy between building your farm and building out your cave, which is both where you live, but also where you're mining for resources. I love the cave theme in general in games, digging deeper and deeper as you dig out a place and see what you discover in that cave. And so I really like that theme of Caverna. The worker placement system, especially with the accumulating resources in both Agricola and Caverna, is really appealing to me, where if someone doesn't take an action space, at the end of the round, you add more stuff to that action space, in many cases, making it more powerful, more appealing for the following round of the game. So I really like that about this entire series of games. I guess so far I haven't talked too much about why a publisher might decide to make a series of games. And I think in some cases like this, I'm guessing that the designer, Uwe Rosenberg, was happy with Agricola, ended up revisiting Agricola for a new edition, but also liked the system enough and found that people liked the system enough that he wanted to explore it in some new way. And in this way, in this case, he wanted to add this whole cave element of the game. He also made the game a little bit easier in terms of how easy it is to feed your people, which is a core part of Agricola, often called misery farming. Agricola is associated with that term. So I think that's something that publishers consider when they get a lot of feedback about a game, both that people really like a game system, but maybe they want something subtle to change about the game, or maybe they have some concerns about the game. It might give the designer ideas to explore a new version of the game itself. And so it might be exciting for the designer, but it also might be something that the publisher thinks about, or the designer thinks about as something that people want. People are talking about it that much, and they keep throwing new ideas onto the pile. It might mean that it doesn't work as an expansion for the original game, but might make more sense as a new game in the series. So that is the Agricola series of games at number 8. At number 7, I have the massive Ticket to Ride series of games. So we have Ticket to Ride Europe, a bunch of different ticket to rides in different areas of the world. There's Ticket to Ride Legacy now, and there's also 2 versions of the game for kids. I think My First Journey and then Ghost Train are both versions of the game for kids. I think my favorite so far is probably still the original Ticket to Ride game. That's the one that I gravitate towards more often, maybe because I know the map pretty well, and because I like the weight of the game on the original map, whereas it actually gets even though it doesn't get too complex to really play on other versions of the map, it's maybe a little bit more complex than I want when I want to sit down and play Ticket to Ride. This is a route building game where you play cards from your hand to build a route, and you're trying to complete these tickets for a bunch of points that connect you from one side of the map to the other. Sometimes there's a lot of I don't want to call it friendly player interaction, but it is a form of player interaction that isn't too unfriendly, and that if I build a route, you can't build that same route, but there's probably another way around it that you can get to a city if you want to get to a specific city. And yeah, Ticket to Ride, I think so far is my favorite from this series. Ticket to Ride, I think, is a great example of a game series that can expand by using new maps around the world. They started with the US, but there's a lot of different places around the world that have trains. So they can add these route building systems and maps around the world. And sometimes that does make sense as an expansion where you just add a new map. But sometimes you really want to layer on these new mechanisms or make what is essentially a standalone game that is so that people don't have to always revert back to the original game. So if someone in Europe wants to buy a Ticket to Ride game, they don't have to buy Ticket to Ride the original and then also buy a map. They can instead buy Ticket to Ride Europe, and it comes with everything that they need in the box itself, including the map that they want to play if they want to play the European map. I don't want to say that's only relevant to people in Europe, but we did get that feedback for Wingspan European, or some people in Europe said, hey, why can't we just buy Wingspan with the European birds? Because these are the birds that we look out of our windows and see every day. So yes, this is even though, and we didn't do that, Ticket to Ride or Wingspan European is not a standalone expansion. You need the core game of Wingspan to play Wingspan European. But anyway, number 7, the Ticket to Ride series of games. At number 6, we have the Azul series of games. This has a couple different types of games. It has Azul Chocolate Edition, which is essentially really just a reskin of the game with new art to make it look like delicious chocolates. We have Azul Mini Edition, and then we have Azul Summer Pavilion, Azul. There's a stained glass one. There's gardens. There's a lot of different versions of the game. Azul Summer Pavilion is my favorite of this series. This is a very successful series of games. In fact, most of the games series that I mentioned here, all these are incredibly successful series of games that have sold many, many copies. And Azul Summer Pavilion is my go-to. This is the one that I have on my shelf, and this is the one that I keep returning to, partially because of how flexible it is. These tokens on the corners, these are tokens that you can save from round to round. So it's you can have up to 4 tokens that you can't place on one round, but that you end up placing on a future round. It also has a really nice sense of completion. You not only are completing these full stars for points, or trying to complete full stars, but oftentimes when you complete intersections of tokens, you get a special benefit that gives you more tiles out of nowhere. So that is a nice way to get some extra benefits as you play the game. That makes you feel the sense of progression in Azul Summer Pavilion. Again, this is a series of games where I think people really like the core drafting system of the game, but there's a lot of ways that you can iterate on that system using different shapes of tokens that aren't compatible, that they wouldn't work as an expansion, but using different shapes of tokens, you can create different patterns, different mats here. So I think this made sense as a fun system for the designers to explore. And I'm glad they did. For all these systems of games, I'm glad that I can learn one system and then use that knowledge to carry over to a similar version of that system with some interesting twists, as is the case in Azul, my number 6 pick in this series of games. At number 5, I have the Mysterium series of games. So this includes Mysterium, Mysterium Park, and Mysterium Kids. And Mysterium Park is my favorite. If you follow this channel, you probably heard me talk about this many times. It's a cooperative game where there is one player who plays as a ghost, a spirit. There's a murder has happened, and they need to convey to the investigators, to the other players, how that happened. Well, at least who committed the murder, who didn't commit the murder in some ways, where the murder didn't happen, using these cards, these dreamlike cards that they're giving to other players. It's the only way that they can communicate. And the other players have to deduce which people didn't commit the murder and which locations the murder didn't happen at. And at the end, you have this final deduction of who actually did it and where did the murder happen. I really like how quick it is to set up and play Mysterium Park. I think it plays in the right amount of time for what I want Mysterium to be. And the limited communication cooperative puzzle is really appealing to me. I think it presents a nice puzzle for the player presenting the clues and a nice puzzle for the players receiving the clues in the game. I think this is an example of the designers taking the original Mysterium game and distilling it down to something really a lot simpler, a lot faster. Not a lot simpler, a little simpler, just enough simpler that it can be played in a much faster playing time. And also with Mysterium Kids, I think they did a really neat thing by taking the system, and instead of using the visual communication, they instead changed it to use a little tambourine, a little kind of bongo drum like thing, where you communicate using sound instead. So they're using this limited communication deduction element, but with a completely different sense. Instead of sight, they use sound, which I think was really clever. So that is the Mysterium series of games at number 5. At number 4, I have the other series of games. It's only 2 so far. I think it could potentially be a 3rd game at some point in the series. This is the Dune Imperium series of games. Dune Imperium and Dune Imperium Uprising. Really hard for me to choose between the 2 games. I think Dune Imperium Uprising does refine some things from the original, but I have the original on my shelf. I'm showing the original on my screen here. It's the one that I definitely played more often and would probably choose if I were choosing between the 2, partially because it's a little bit more streamlined, and I generally gravitate towards, just personal preference, gravitate towards medium weight games rather than medium weight games that start to encroach upon heavyweight games. But they're very close. I would gladly play either Dune Imperium game at any time. It's a deck building game combined with worker placement, where the cards you play determine where you can actually play workers on your turn. And any cards that you don't play during the round are left over to either buy more cards at the end of the round or to participate in combat at the end of the round. It's a really great system. It got me into the Dune world, got me excited about the books and the movies. And yeah, so I think this might be the only IP game on the list. There's one more that's going to come, but the only series of games that's based on an intellectual property. And I think this is an interesting concept, something that we've talked about exploring with Red Rising a little bit. Whereas instead of just making an expansion to explore future books in the series or future movies even by creating not entirely new games, but new games that share systems but add new characters that kind of show the evolution of the world through the evolution of the mechanisms of the game. So I think that's a neat thing about Dune Imperium Uprising and Dune Imperium. At number 3, I have the aforementioned Terra Mystica series of games. So Terra Mystica, Terra Nova, Gaia Project, and Age of Innovation. I think Terra Mystica is still my favorite on this list. I know there are many reasons to pick the other games on this list. Perhaps it's nostalgia for me. Perhaps it's just because it's the one that I most played. But I love Terra Mystica. It is the first game that I had played where you're presented with this player mat that's covered with stuff. And during the game, you remove this stuff from the player mat and place it on the board. I think there's a picture of the board right over. Oh, where is it? Nope, still player mats. Okay, there's the board. And you're placing things on the board itself. It has a really cool magic system where you're moving. This is like its own system right here. And this is all these different systems in the game. The asymmetry, the board, there's some positive player interaction on the board, this removing tokens. But I'll talk about the magic for a second. I think sometimes when you have a game with a system that works really, really well, that's really innovative, like the magic system in Terra Mystica, I think it's fun for designers to explore similar games that use that system, but maybe explore other worlds. Like in Gaia Project, they explored space with that system. It's fun to have these systems. I'm saying this as a designer. It's fun to create a system or a mini system and to be able to explore that in other games. I think sometimes when people hear about these systems of games, like why are they making another Terra Mystica game instead of just making a completely new game? Partially it's because it's fun to explore these types of systems in new ways. And it's fun for people who already know those systems and have explored them to be able to apply them to new worlds or to other mini systems around it. For me, it's all about fun. And I can see designers having fun with these systems and publishers having fun with these systems. I love that. And that's one of the reasons I really, really love. I'm sorry. I actually jumped ahead here. Oh, yeah. So this is, anyway, yeah, I jumped ahead a little bit in terms of that topic. But yeah, that's why I love the Terra Mystica series of games. I missed one, or I forgot that put in one here. I'll remove it from my screen for a second. But we're going to pull up my number 2 pick right here. And this pick is a game that has a really vast series. It has a game that's on my shelf right now that I haven't played yet. And this one is Clank. So the Clank series of games includes Clank, including expansions, Clank in Space, Clank Catacombs, and Clank Legacy 1 and 2. Clank Legacy 2 is the game that's on my shelf right now. This is a deck building dungeon crawl game where you are using your deck to manipulate your own token to run down into a dungeon, gather a bunch of stuff, including hopefully an artifact, and run back up out of the dungeon, at least over the surface line, and hopefully completely out of the dungeon to get as many points as possible. As much, I think they score in coins in Clank. I've had a lot of fun with every single game in this series, Clank in Space, Clank Catacombs, but I keep coming back to Clank. I like to be able to look at a preset board and figure out what my path is, and to uncover as I play what that path becomes. I might say, okay, I want to run after that specific artifact, but depending on the cards that come up, that might change the rhythm of where I can go or where I want to go in the game. And that's fun too. Seeing the paths not taken for me is just as fun to see the path that I hope to take in Clank. I don't know. I think this is a neat series to explore because they explored it in a different way thematically with Clank in Space. They explored the idea of not letting you see all the paths up front with Clank Catacombs. And then with Clank Legacy, they explored the idea of what if you are building the board as you play. So they're using the same core mechanism, but exploring completely different subsets of that mechanism and different worlds in different games within this series. I love this series of games. I bought pretty much everything that can be played within the Clank Legacy or Clank series of games, and that is why it is my number 2 on this list. I think I may have misspoke earlier and said that the Terra Mystica system was my number 2, but I meant for that to be Clank. So at number 1, we have the newest entry on this list paired with one of the oldest games on this list, and that is Seven Wonders. The Seven Wonders series. So my pick for this list is Duel for Middle Earth, the latest entry in this series of games. So in Duel for Middle-earth, it's using the Seven Wonders drafting system and oftentimes the Seven Wonders resource system with some slight tweaks, but added to it this wonderful Middle-earth theme that has you pursuing, instead of victory points, you're pursuing 3 different instant win conditions. Either you're winning on the battlefield here on the map, you're winning based on having the allegiance of all 6 different races, or you are winning based on, what is the last win condition? Oh, by on the track of trying to either get to Mordor or catch the hobbits based on who you are. There really isn't much asymmetry in the game other than where you start on the map and if you are chasing or running to Mordor. But that's okay. I think the game works exactly as it is. This game series has also started out with Seven Wonders, the card drafting game, Seven Wonders Duel, which is very similar to Duel for Middle-earth, and also Seven Wonders Architects. There might be something else that I'm forgetting in there, but I believe those are the 4 games in the series right now, along with lots of expansions for Seven Wonders and Seven Wonders Duel. I think it's really neat. This system of games is really neat in particular because it takes this idea that you are accumulating resource cards that you can continually spend. You're not getting rid of the card when you spend it. You have the card, you have that resource from then on. But they've iterated with different drafting systems in the game. Every game in the series has a different drafting system. There's the kind of this staggered drafting system in Seven Wonders Duel and Duel for Middle-earth. There's pass your hand around the table in Seven Wonders, and then there is the kind of the piles of cards that you're choosing one of those piles in Seven Wonders Architects. So I think this is really neat to explore, to have some elements that are consistent between the different games in this series, but also have different iterations on drafting in this series. I think that's a really neat way to approach a series of games. I'm trying to think if there's anything else from a design or publishing perspective that I wanted to talk about for talking about various series of games. For the most part, though, I really think when a designer and or a publisher pursues a new game in a series, instead of just starting a completely new series, it's for 2 reasons. One, it's because fans of that game have expressed a desire for new games in that series. Not just expansions for the current game, but they've expressed a desire for new worlds, new themes, new iterations of the mechanisms. It's often because of that, and or because the designer wants to have fun exploring some other subset of this game in a different game, in a new game, instead of just a new expansion. And I think both of those things are okay. Both of those things are great. It's great to see those types of iterations on things that are familiar but different. I'm okay with that. I like that I don't have to completely relearn a game, but that I can explore a new system in a game that I'm already familiar with, a game that I already know that I really enjoy. It's a little bit like book series or series of movies. Like, I'm glad that Marvel doesn't just have one movie. I'm glad that Star Wars doesn't just have one movie. I like that they explore other movies within those vast universes. Doesn't mean that I also don't want writers and movie creators and game designers to create completely new games and new worlds. I want that too, but I think both can coexist. And I'm glad publishers have explored the series of games that I mentioned on this list and the 40 plus other series of games listed in the description below. Check it out. Let me know what series of games is your favorite and why you like that creator, that publisher, that designer went with a series of games. Let me know your thoughts on that series, especially what made that series special, and encouraged you to explore multiple games within that series. Look forward to hearing your thoughts in the comments below. Thanks.